Welcome back to Sleeping History Dreams. Tonight, we step into a real moment from the past, through the lives of the people who lived it, the places they walked, and the records they left behind. Settle in and let the story begin. On the night of December 16th, 1773, a chill swept through Boston Harbor as a group of men, faces painted and dressed as Mohawk Indians, prepared for a moment that would echo through the annals of history. Among them stood Samuel Adams, his heart racing with anticipation. The air was thick with tension, the sound of water lapping against the ships muted by the weight of their purpose. They were on the brink of defiance, ready to challenge the very authority that sought to subjugate them. The moonlight glinted off the wooden hulls of the ships, revealing the precious cargo they held, over 300 chests of British tea, a symbol of oppression and taxation without representation. The Sons of Liberty had gathered, driven by a fierce resolve to make their voices heard. Adams, standing tall among his compatriots, whispered, "This is our moment. We must show them we will not be silenced." As they boarded the vessels, the tension morphed into action. The men moved with purpose, their breaths visible in the cold air. The first chest was pried open with a crowbar, the fragrant tea spilling forth like a cascade of rebellion. "Throw it overboard," a voice rang out, igniting a chorus of agreement. One by one, they hurled chest after chest into the icy waters, the sound of wood splintering and tea crashing against the waves resonating in the night. The harbor transformed into a scene of chaos and resolve as the tea floated away. A stark reminder of the colonists' anger. "We've done it," one participant exclaimed, the thrill of defiance coursing through him. But as shouts of triumph filled the air, distant drums echoed through the streets, the unmistakable sound of British soldiers approaching. The mood shifted, exhilaration morphed into fear. A sense of urgency gripped the crowd. "We must go, quickly," Adams urged, his voice steady despite the rising panic. They retreated from the ships, leaving behind the remnants of their rebellion floating in the harbor. But the British response was swift. As they slipped into the shadows, the soldiers prepared to restore order, unaware that the act of defiance they had just witnessed would ignite a firestorm across the colonies. But to understand how we got here, we must trace the roots of this defiance. The conflict had been brewing for years, ignited by a series of oppressive laws imposed by the British Parliament. The Stamp Act of 1765 had first stirred the pot, demanding tax on every piece of printed paper, from newspapers to legal documents. Colonists railed against this infringement on their rights. As Patrick Henry declared, "Taxation without representation is tyranny." Tensions escalated further with the Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposed duties on goods such as glass, paper, and tea. The anger of the colonists grew, leading to protests and boycotts. The British response was heavy-handed, sending troops to maintain order, but this only intensified the desire for independence. In March 1770, the Boston Massacre had become a flashpoint. Crispus Attucks, a man of African and Native American descent, was among the first to fall when British soldiers fired into a crowd of protesters, killing 5. The incident galvanized public sentiment against British rule, with Adams himself proclaiming, "It is the first blood that has been drawn, and it will be remembered." By the time December arrived, the situation was volatile. The Sons of Liberty, led by figures like Adams, had transformed from mere protesters into a formidable force, ready to challenge the might of the British Empire. The Boston Tea Party marked a pivotal moment in this escalating conflict. A bold declaration that the colonists would no longer accept the chains of oppression. As the echoes of the night settled, the realization dawned that a revolution was not just a possibility, it was inevitable. The act of defiance would ripple across the colonies, stirring the hearts of many and setting the stage for the fight for independence that lay ahead. The Boston Harbor, once a quiet waterway, now bore witness to the birth of a new nation, one that would rise from the ashes of rebellion fueled by the dreams of its people. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, the colonies were a tapestry of diverse experiences, aspirations, and simmering discontent. The world was shaped by a complex interplay of political power, economic hardship, and a growing desire for autonomy among the colonists. In Boston, a city at the heart of this emerging unrest, The streets were alive with the chatter of merchants and artisans, the calls of street hawkers, and the rumble of carriages over cobblestones. Samuel Adams, a key figure in the brewing revolution, was driven by a fierce desire for independence. By 1773, he was a well-known leader within the Sons of Liberty, a group formed to oppose British tyranny. Adams understood the power of rhetoric, and he was unafraid to use it. In a meeting held in Faneuil Hall, he proclaimed, "It does not require a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen to set brush fires in people's minds." His words ignited passions among his fellow colonists, who began to see the possibility of a life free from British oppression. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, King George III was adamant about maintaining control over the colonies. In 1765, he had imposed the Stamp Act, which mandated that many printed materials in the colonies be produced on stamped paper, produced in London, carrying an embossed revenue stamp. This act was met with fierce resistance. Colonists viewed it as a direct assault on their rights. The Stamp Act Congress convened in October 1765, where delegates from 9 colonies gathered to protest the act, stating in their resolutions that taxation without representation was tyranny. The tensions were palpable. In the streets of Boston, mobs gathered, fueled by anger and a sense of betrayal. The effigy of a tax collector was hung from a tree, a symbol of resistance. In one of the more notorious incidents, a group of angry colonists descended upon the home of Andrew Oliver, the appointed stamp distributor for Massachusetts, smashing windows and destroying his possessions. The violence was a reflection of the desperation felt by many, a desire to be heard, to resist what they perceived as an overreach of authority. As the years progressed, the Townshend Acts of 1767 further inflamed the situation. Imposing duties on imported goods such as glass, paper, paint, and tea, these acts were seen as another form of taxation without representation. The colonies responded with boycotts and protests, and merchants began to organize against British goods. The tension reached a boiling point on March 5, 1770, during the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists, killing 5 and wounding others, including Crispus Attucks, a man of African and Native American descent, who has since been recognized as a martyr of the Revolution. Amidst this chaos, other leaders emerged. John Hancock, a wealthy merchant and prominent patriot, became known for his flamboyant lifestyle and his outspoken opposition to British rule. He was a key figure in financing revolutionary activities and was present during the Boston Tea Party. Hancock's charisma and financial backing made him a formidable ally to Adams and the Sons of Liberty. In contrast, there were those who remained loyal to the Crown. These loyalists, including merchants who benefited from trade with Britain, feared the consequences of rebellion. They saw chaos in the streets and believed that the colonies were better off under British governance. Among them was Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor of Massachusetts, who struggled to maintain order in a city that was increasingly hostile to British authority. As the years rolled into 1773, the colonial response to British policies crystallized into a series of coordinated acts of defiance. The Boston Tea Party, which would take place later that year, was not a spontaneous act, but rather the culmination of years of agitation, organization, and a growing sense of identity among the colonists. The event itself was meticulously planned. On the night of December 16th, a group of colonists, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded ships in Boston Harbor, dumping 342 chests of tea into the icy waters. This act of rebellion was not merely about tea. It was a rejection of the notion that the British Parliament could impose taxes on Americans without their consent. The colonists proclaimed their rights as Englishmen, and their actions echoed in the halls of power across the ocean. The aftermath of the Tea Party was swift and severe. In response, Parliament enacted the Coercive Acts in 1774, a series of punitive measures designed to reassert British authority. These acts closed Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for, effectively crippling the local economy and igniting further resistance. The colonies rallied around Boston, seeing their plight as a shared struggle against tyranny. The First Continental Congress convened in September 1774, representing a significant step towards unity among the colonies, where delegates discussed and coordinated their responses to British policies. It was within this atmosphere of unrest and resistance that ordinary people became revolutionaries. Farmers, artisans, and laborers found their voices and began to organize. The committees of correspondence were established to facilitate communication between the colonies, sharing news of British actions and colonial responses. The spirit of cooperation and solidarity grew, as did the recognition that they were not merely subjects of a distant king, but a collective of individuals with shared rights and aspirations. As the revolutionary fervor spread, the colonies began to envision a future free from British rule. The notion of American identity was beginning to take shape, grounded in the belief that liberty and self-governance were inalienable rights. This emerging identity was not without its challenges. Divisions existed within communities, and the question of loyalty weighed heavily on many. Yet the desire for freedom became a powerful unifying force, leading to a collective consciousness that would ultimately change the course of history. In the quiet moments of reflection amidst the turmoil, figures like Samuel Adams and John Hancock understood the gravity of their actions. They knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, yet they pressed on, driven by a vision of a new nation built on the principles of liberty and justice. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define not only the future of the colonies, but also the very essence of what it meant to be American. As tensions mounted, the people of Boston and the surrounding colonies prepared for the inevitable clash with British forces. The revolution was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality that loomed on the horizon, and its impact would be felt for generations to come. In every corner of the colonies, the call for freedom echoed louder, a clarion call that would unite a disparate group of individuals into a cohesive force determined to shape their destiny. And so the origins of the American Revolution were rooted in the lives of real people, their hopes and fears, their struggles and triumphs. The world as it was before the Revolution was a world on the brink of transformation, where the spark of rebellion would soon ignite into a flame that would light the way for future generations. The resolve of the colonists, tempered by years of oppression, would soon lead them to forge a new path, one that would resonate throughout history. In the summer of 1775, as the world watched the American colonies, tensions reached a boiling point. The whispers of rebellion had transformed into a clarion call for independence. On June 17, 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill unfolded on the outskirts of Boston. Colonists, led by William Prescott, dug in among the earthworks, fortifying their position as British troops advanced with determination. Prescott famously instructed his men, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," emphasizing the importance of conserving ammunition against the well-trained British forces. The battle itself was a bloody affair. The British, under General William Howe, suffered heavy casualties, with over 1,000 troops either dead or wounded by the end of that day. In contrast, the colonial forces, numbering around 2,400, lost approximately 450 men. Despite being technically a British victory, the high cost of the battle sent ripples of confidence throughout the colonies. As the smoke cleared, the realization dawned upon the colonists that they could stand against the might of the British Empire. In the wake of Bunker Hill, a sense of unity began to crystallize among the colonies. On July 5, 1775, the Continental Congress adopted the Olive Branch Petition, a final attempt to reconcile with King George III, affirming their loyalty while asserting their rights. However, the king responded with disdain, declaring the colonies to be in a state of rebellion and sending more troops to quell the unrest. This rejection shattered any remaining hopes for peaceful resolution. The year marched on, and with it came the emergence of influential figures whose ideas ignited the revolutionary spirit. Thomas Paine published Common Sense in January 1776, a pamphlet that would sell over 500,000 copies and resonate deeply with the colonists. Paine's writing was visceral. He argued that it was time for the colonies to break free from British rule, framing the struggle for independence not only as a political necessity, but as a moral imperative. He famously declared, "These are the times that try men's souls." The pamphlet became a catalyst, galvanizing public opinion and turning skepticism into fervent support for independence. The Continental Congress, emboldened by the growing sentiment across the colonies, convened again in May 1776. Here, the debate surrounding independence reached a crescendo. Figures like John Adams and Benjamin Franklin argued passionately for separation from Britain, while others, like John Dickinson, cautioned against hasty actions. Yet the tide was shifting. The voices for independence grew louder, fueled by the mounting evidence of British oppression and the desire for self-governance. On June 11, 1776, Congress appointed a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was chosen to pen the document, a task he undertook with a mix of honor and trepidation. He drew upon Enlightenment ideals, weaving together notions of liberty, equality, and the rights of man. The phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," would echo throughout history, encapsulating the colonists' aspirations for a new nation. As the drafting unfolded, Jefferson sought input from his peers, including Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. The final version was presented to Congress on July 2, 1776. After much debate and revision, the Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4, 1776, a date that would become etched in the annals of American history. In that moment, the colonies formally declared their intent to sever ties with Britain, marking the birth of a new nation. Public reaction was electric. In cities and towns across the colonies, celebrations erupted as men and women gathered to read the Declaration aloud. The streets were filled with cheers, bonfires, banners, and the ringing of bells. In New York City, a statue of King George III was toppled, symbolizing the rejection of British authority. Yet amidst the jubilation, the reality of war loomed large. The colonists understood that they were embarking on a perilous journey, one fraught with uncertainty and sacrifice. As the summer of 1776 progressed, the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, faced daunting challenges. The army was poorly equipped and outmatched by the British forces, who had the advantage of experience and resources. Washington's leadership was tested during the Battle of Brooklyn in August 1776, where the British inflicted a devastating defeat on the Continental Army. Washington's forces suffered heavy losses, retreating to Manhattan in disarray. Yet, even in the face of adversity, the spirit of resistance endured. The winter of 1776 brought with it a pivotal moment. Washington recognized the need for a victory to bolster morale among his troops and the broader populace. On the night of December 25th, he executed a daring maneuver, crossing the icy Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on the Hessian forces in Trenton, New Jersey. The assault, carried out on the morning of December 26th, resulted in a decisive victory for the Continental Army, capturing nearly 1,000 Hessian soldiers. This victory reinvigorated the revolutionary cause. It showcased Washington's strategic brilliance and provided a much-needed boost to the morale of the troops. As the new year dawned, the colonists clung to the hope that freedom was within reach. The resilience displayed during this time was a testament to the determination of the people. They believed they were on the cusp of realizing their aspirations for independence, though the path ahead remained fraught with danger. Meanwhile, the British forces continued to regroup, determined to quell the rebellion. General Howe aimed to capture Philadelphia, viewing it as a crucial blow to the rebellious spirit of the colonies. The ensuing battles of Brandywine and Germantown, fought in September and October of 1777, saw Washington's forces engage with the British in fierce combat. Despite facing setbacks, Washington's strategic retreats kept his army intact, allowing him to regroup and plan for future engagements. As the year progressed, the tide of war began to shift. The Continental Army's perseverance culminated in the pivotal victory at Saratoga in October 1777. This engagement marked a turning point in the war. The British General John Burgoyne's surrender to American forces was not only a military triumph but also a diplomatic victory. The American success at Saratoga showcased to the world that the rebellion had merit and strength, ultimately leading to France formally recognizing the United States and entering the war as an ally in 1778. The early years of the Revolution were defined by a complex interplay of hope and despair, victories and defeats. The ideas that had sparked the flames of rebellion spread like wildfire throughout the colonies. Individuals began to envision a new society, one built upon the principles of liberty, equality, and justice. The promise of independence became a shared dream, uniting disparate colonies under a common banner. As the war continued, the sacrifices of ordinary men and women became increasingly apparent. Soldiers faced harsh winters, scarcity of supplies, and the constant threat of battle. Yet they persevered, driven by the belief that their struggle was for something greater than themselves. The revolution was not merely a fight against British tyranny. It symbolized the fight for a future where individuals could govern themselves and determine their own destinies. The spirit of the revolution lived on in the hearts of the people. Their aspirations, their sacrifices, and their belief in a brighter future resonated through the tumultuous years. In the backdrop of war, the idea of a nation founded on the principles of liberty and justice began to take root. The revolution was a collective endeavor, a tapestry woven from the diverse threads of hope, resilience, and an unyielding desire for freedom. As the year 1776 drew to a close, the growing momentum of the revolution hinted at the promise of a new beginning. The struggle was far from over, but the resolve of the people had solidified. They believed in their cause, and with each passing day, the dream of independence became more tangible, steadily transforming from a flicker of hope into an unwavering flame. On April 19, 1775, the air hung heavy with tension in Lexington, Massachusetts, as dawn broke over the small New England town. A quiet stillness enveloped the village green, where a handful of militiamen stood facing the approaching British troops, their hearts pounding in anticipation. Captain John Parker, having received word of the British march to seize colonial arms, instructed his men, "Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon." It was a moment fraught with uncertainty, yet it would become forever etched in history as the shot heard round the world. The British troops, led by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, numbered around 700, their disciplined ranks a stark contrast to the ragtag group of colonial militia before them. As the soldiers marched under the command of General Gage, they aimed to quell the burgeoning rebellion. It was a mission rooted in the fear of an uprising, a response to the defiance shown by the colonies in recent years, particularly following the Boston Tea Party. The British government sought to reassert control, believing that decisive force would restore order. As the two sides faced each other, a nervous silence fell over the village green. It was broken suddenly by the crack of a musket shot. Accounts vary on who fired first, but the chaos that ensued was unmistakable. In an instant, the sense of impending conflict transformed into violent reality. The gunfire echoed across the fields, and within moments, 8 colonists lay dead or dying, victims of a struggle that had escalated beyond anyone's control. One of the militiamen, Samuel Hadley, fell, shot in the chest. His last words, "I am done for," would haunt those who survived. The British troops, initially taken aback, quickly regained their composure and returned fire. The militia, outgunned and outmatched, scattered in fear, yet they were united by their resolve. By the end of the skirmish, the British claimed they had suffered only 1 wounded, but the true toll of the clash would resonate far beyond that morning. The bloodshed marked the beginning of open conflict, transforming simmering discontent into full-scale war. As news of the violence spread, it ignited a fervor among the colonial population. In nearby Concord, the cries of alarm rang out. Paul Revere and William Dawes rode through the night, warning the colonists that the British were coming. Their ride became legendary, a symbol of the urgency and desperation felt by those who yearned for freedom. By the time the British troops reached Concord, they found the colonists were no longer passive subjects. They were ready to resist. In Concord, the local militia had gathered, armed and prepared. As the British soldiers searched for weapons, they were met with resistance, and the confrontation turned violent once more. The colonial forces engaged the British, who were now retreating back to Boston under intense fire. A running gun battle ensued, with militiamen taking cover behind trees and stone walls, firing at the retreating troops. The British faced a harrowing return, suffering significant casualties along the way. By the time the British reached safety in Boston, over 270 of their soldiers had been killed or wounded. while the colonial militias had incurred around 90 casualties. The blood spilled that day was a catalyst, igniting the revolutionary fervor that would sweep through the colonies. The realization settled heavy in the hearts of men and women alike. They were no longer subjects of the British Crown, they were rebels. In the days following the skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, the sense of urgency only increased. By May 1775, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia, a gathering of colonial leaders including John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. Here they faced a monumental decision, whether to pursue reconciliation with the British government or to prepare for war. Adams, ever the passionate advocate for independence, argued fervently for armed resistance, stating, "The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat it, sir, let it come." His words resonated deeply with those present. Jefferson, meanwhile, began drafting a document that would declare the colony's intentions to the world. The atmosphere was electric, with a mix of fear and hope, uncertainty and resolve. The Continental Army was formed, with George Washington appointed as its commander-in-chief on June 15, 1775. He took command in the wake of the Battle of Bunker Hill, which had occurred just days prior. Though a costly battle for the colonists, with over 400 casualties, it demonstrated their determination and capability to stand against the British forces. Washington understood the gravity of the situation, remarking, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." As the summer of 1775 wore on, the fighting spread beyond Massachusetts. The siege of Boston began, with colonial forces surrounding the city and effectively cutting off British supply lines. The British were trapped, and the colonists, emboldened by their early victories, began to believe they could indeed challenge the might of the British Empire. However, the human cost of the conflict was staggering. Soldiers faced grim conditions, supplies were scarce, and disease ran rampant. In the autumn of 1775, the Continental Army suffered from shortages of food, clothing, and proper shelter. The harsh realities of war sank in as men battled not only the enemy, but the elements as well. Yet despite these hardships, the resolve to fight for independence only grew stronger. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet Common Sense, which argued passionately for independence from Britain. His words struck a chord, rallying support across the colonies. "These are the times that try men's souls," he wrote, encapsulating the sentiment of a nation on the brink of rebellion. By March, the Continental Congress had declared that the colonies were no longer subject to British rule, a pivotal step toward independence. As the Revolutionary War dragged on, the harsh realities of conflict continued to unfold. Battles were fought in places like Trenton and Princeton, where the resilience of the Continental Army was tested time and again. Winter encampments were brutal, with soldiers like those at Valley Forge facing starvation and exposure. Yet the spirit of rebellion endured. By the time the Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4, 1776, the seeds of revolution had taken root. The human cost of the conflict was already immense, with thousands dead and many more suffering. The document, penned by Jefferson, proclaimed the resolve of the colonies to break free from British tyranny, stating, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." This declaration was not merely a statement of intent. It was a rallying cry for a nation determined to forge its own destiny. The war that began with a single shot in Lexington had transformed the colonies into a battleground for freedom and self-determination. As the echoes of conflict reverberated across the land, the sacrifices made by countless individuals would shape the very foundation of a new nation. The resolve to fight for liberty was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality forged in the fires of crisis. Thus, the revolution gained momentum, forever altering the course of history. The shadows of war would loom large, yet within them lay the promise of a future built on the principles of liberty and justice. As the conflict raged on, the collective spirit of the American people would continue to rise, driven by a profound desire to be free. As dawn broke on June 17, 1775, the air hung heavy with anticipation. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the sweat of the gathered militia, a blend both familiar and foreboding. The Battle of Bunker Hill was about to unfold, a confrontation that would shift the balance of power and resolve within the American colonies. The previous months had seen the simmering tensions escalate into open conflict, and now the colonists prepared to face British forces head-on. William Prescott, a leader among the militia, stood resolute on the heights of Breed's Hill, overlooking the harbour of Charlestown. The day before, he had instructed his men, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." This maxim, born of necessity, reflected both the urgency and the desperate hope of the colonial forces, who were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. On this day, Prescott and his men would challenge the might of the British Empire, emboldened by their previous encounters and the fervor of their cause. Approximately 2,400 British troops, under the command of General William Howe, advanced toward the American positions. They were well disciplined and equipped, their red coats stark against the green of the New England landscape. Howe was determined to reclaim the heights and quell the uprising once and for all. His orders were clear: take the hill and crush the rebellion. As the British approached, the militia held their breath, hearts pounding in their chests. Prescott's words echoed in their minds. The initial exchange of fire was brutal. The colonists, fortified by their resolve and the knowledge that they were fighting for their homes, unleashed a volley that took the British troops by surprise. The first wave of redcoats fell, and for a moment the tide seemed to favor the Americans. The sound of gunfire shattered the morning calm. The clash of musket balls met the cries of men, and for each British soldier who fell, the colonists felt a surge of hope. But hope was not enough to match the relentless advance of the British. As the day wore on, reinforcements arrived for Howe, bolstering his numbers and turning the tide against the colonial defenders. The British forces regrouped and launched a second assault. The militia, though brave, were quickly running low on ammunition and morale. Prescott knew that their position was vulnerable, and as the British pressed forward with renewed vigor, he made the heart-wrenching decision to order a retreat. The battle ended with significant losses on both sides. The British recorded over 1,000 casualties, while the colonial forces suffered approximately 450. Among the fallen was Joseph Warren, a prominent leader and friend to many of the militiamen. Warren had insisted on fighting alongside his compatriots, believing that his presence would inspire his men. A witness recalled that Warren, with his last breath, shouted, "The cause of liberty is worth fighting for." His death resonated deeply, becoming a rallying cry for the colonists in the days to come. In the aftermath of the battle, the mood among the colonists was a mixture of despair and determination. Though they had lost the ground, they had demonstrated that they could stand against the might of the British Empire. Samuel Adams, who had been watching the events unfold from a distance, felt the weight of the moment. "What we have seen today," he proclaimed to a gathering of supporters, "is a testament to our resolve. We may have lost a hill, but we have gained our spirit." The events of Bunker Hill solidified the resolve of the Continental Congress, which convened shortly afterward. The leaders who had once been hesitant began to see the necessity of declaring independence. John Hancock, now president of the Congress, rallied his fellow delegates. "We must unite," he urged. "We are no longer subjects. We are men who seek to govern ourselves." The echoes of the battle reverberated through the halls of Congress, inspiring a collective commitment to the cause. In the months that followed, the spirit of rebellion surged. The victory at Bunker Hill, despite the loss, acted as a catalyst for recruitment. Men from across the colonies joined the ranks of the Continental Army, eager to defend their newfound identity as Americans. The likes of George Washington, appointed as Commander-in-Chief in June 1775, would lead these brave souls into the throes of war, inspired by the sacrifice of their fallen compatriots. As summer turned to autumn, the conflict intensified. The colonists found themselves facing not only the British troops, but also the realities of warfare. Supplies dwindled, and the harsh conditions of New England began to take their toll. But the resolve among the colonists held firm, fueled by the memories of Bunker Hill and the sacrifices made there. The idea of independence took root in their minds, growing ever stronger as they faced adversity. In the quiet moments of reflection, soldiers would speak of fallen comrades and the lives they had left behind. A soldier named Thomas, who had once been a simple farmer, now found himself in the thick of battle, a musket in hand and a determination in his heart. "I fight not just for myself or my land," he remarked, "but for the dreams of a free people." His sentiment echoed throughout the encampments, a testament to the transformation that was taking place within the hearts and minds of ordinary men. Meanwhile, the British continued to strategize their next moves, believing that the colonists would soon tire of the conflict. General Howe, confident in his military prowess, underestimated the resolve of the men he faced. "They will come to their senses," he said dismissively, "and realize the futility of their rebellion." However, the colonists were far from defeated. With each passing day, their commitment to the cause of liberty deepened, and their desire for independence became unmistakably clear. As the winter approached, with its biting cold and gnawing hunger, the Continental Army would be tested like never before. The struggles of men like Thomas and Prescott would shape the narrative of the Revolution. The sacrifices they made and the bravery they exhibited would become the foundation upon which a new nation would rise. Each battle, loss, and victory contributed to the larger story of the fight for independence, culminating in the declaration that would echo through history. As the year drew to a close, the spirit of the Revolution remained alive, a flickering flame against the encroaching darkness. The Battle of Bunker Hill had proven that the colonists were willing to stand and fight, even in the face of overwhelming odds. They had tasted both victory and defeat, but more importantly, they had forged a new identity. The idea of independence was no longer a distant dream. It was a cause worth fighting for, and it would continue to burn brightly in the hearts of those who sought freedom. In the quiet aftermath of those tumultuous months, men and women across the colonies would remember the sacrifices made on that fateful day in June. They would share stories of courage and loss, of unity and defiance, binding them together in a shared struggle for their rights. The memory of Bunker Hill would linger in the air, a poignant reminder that the fight for liberty had only just begun. The morning after the Battle of Bunker Hill, the air hung heavy with the smell of gunpowder and the bitter tang of sweat. The battlefield, now a scarred landscape of fallen soldiers, bore witness to the ferocity of the struggle for independence. On June 18, 1775, the British remained poised in their red coats, the sun glinting off their muskets. But the cost of victory weighed heavily on them. The British had claimed the hill, yet the loss of nearly 1,000 men would linger in the minds of their commanders, their triumph steeped in sorrow. Colonial militias, having retreated but not defeated, gathered at Faneuil Hall, a stone's throw from the harbour. Here Samuel Adams and John Hancock convened, their voices rising amidst the murmurs of grief and resolve. The air was thick with tension as they spoke of the losses, yet amidst the mourning, a fierce determination took root. Adams declared, "The blood of our brethren cries to us from the ground. We must stand united." The sentiment resonated deeply. It echoed the shared grief of families who had lost fathers, sons, brothers, men who had stood together on the battlefield, now separated by death. In the days that followed, the reality of the conflict settled over Boston like a shroud. The streets, once bustling with the sounds of daily life, now carried an undercurrent of fear and anticipation. Each knock on the door brought news, some welcomed, others devastating. Families received word of loved ones' injuries or deaths, while others learned of miraculous escapes. The town, once a vibrant hub of commerce and trade, became a crucible of loss and resilience. Amidst this turmoil, the question of governance loomed large. On July the 6th, 1775, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, a gathering of leaders who recognized the gravity of their situation. Delegates from across the 13 colonies arrived, bearing news of the battle and the growing resolve among the populace. Benjamin Franklin, with his characteristic wit, remarked, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." The room filled with murmurs, a collective understanding that the path forward would not be easy, but it was necessary. As the summer wore on, the devastation of the battle gave way to a surge in enlistments. Men from all walks of life flocked to join the militia, their hearts ignited by the spirit of rebellion. The call to arms resonated, echoing through the countryside. Farmers, tradesmen, and laborers left their plows and workshops, driven by the desire for liberty. Many marched off to join the fight, their faces set with determination, clutching muskets that were often older than they were. In the wake of the battle, a new sense of identity began to coalesce. The colonists, once divided by loyalties to their respective colonies, now found common ground in their shared struggle against British oppression. The phrase, "the shot heard round the world," became a rallying cry, encapsulating the spirit of resistance that had ignited in Lexington and Concord and now spread like wildfire. Yet not every town embraced the revolution. Loyalists lingered in the shadows, fearful of the wrath of their neighbors. In Boston, tensions flared as accusations flew, and distrust simmered beneath the surface. The British authorities, determined to quell the unrest, tightened their grip, further alienating the colonists. As the summer culminated, the struggle intensified. In August, General William Howe, the British commander, devised a plan to assert control over the colonies. His strategy hinged on a decisive blow, aiming to capture New York City, a strategic stronghold that would enable greater control over the rebellious colonies. Meanwhile, the Continental Army, now led by George Washington, prepared for what would become a protracted conflict. The autumn months brought with them both promise and peril. The Continental Congress, emboldened by the spirit of unity, authorized the formation of a more structured army, appointing Washington as its commander-in-chief on June 15, 1775. Washington, a man of stature and experience, understood the weight of his new position. In his inaugural address as commander, he reflected on the sacrifices made by his fellow patriots, stating, "The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army." The winter of 1775–76 settled in, offering no respite. As the temperatures dropped, the reality of war seeped into the lives of those who had enlisted. The harsh conditions at camp tested the resolve of soldiers. Disease spread like wildfire, exacerbated by inadequate supplies and the lack of proper shelter. Yet amidst the hardships, stories of bravery and camaraderie emerged. Soldiers banded together, relying on one another for support, forging bonds that would last a lifetime. The winter also bore witness to the emergence of new ideas. Pamphlets circulated advocating for independence. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in January 1776, reached a wide audience, articulating the colony's desire for self-governance and the moral imperative of independence. Paine's words ignited a fervor among the populace, further galvanizing the revolutionary spirit. By the spring of 1776, the mood across the colonies had shifted dramatically. The prospect of declaring independence loomed large, and debates raged within the halls of Congress. John Adams, a fervent advocate for independence, passionately argued, "We must declare our independence, or we will be forever shackled." The momentous decision to declare independence would soon be made. But the scars of the past were still fresh. Families mourned their losses, communities struggled to rebuild, and the specter of war hung heavy over the land. Yet, the collective memory of sacrifice served as a catalyst for change, propelling the colonies toward a future where liberty could be realized. As summer approached, the Continental Congress convened once more, now filled with the weight of history in the making. The discussions grew heated as delegates weighed the risks and potential consequences of a formal declaration. The words of Patrick Henry echoed in their minds, "Give me liberty or give me death." The passion for freedom burned brighter than ever. On July 2nd, 1776, the decision was reached, and the Continental Congress officially voted to declare independence from Britain. The act would not only reshape the colony's fate, but also reverberate across the globe, inspiring other nations to seek their own liberation. The aftermath of Bunker Hill, with its loss and upheaval, had set the stage for this pivotal moment. The events of that fateful day had not only claimed lives, but had forged a new identity for the colonists, one rooted in the desire for freedom and self-determination. In the weeks and months that followed, as the struggle for independence intensified, the sacrifices of those who had fallen would be honored through the fight for a brighter future. In the quiet of those early summer days, as the scent of blooming flowers filled the air, the memories of the fallen lingered, a reminder of the cost of liberty. Each soldier who marched into battle carried with them the weight of their predecessors' sacrifices, propelling them forward in the name of a cause that resonated deeply within their hearts. The path to independence had begun, shaped by the ashes of conflict and the unyielding spirit of those who dared to dream of a nation where freedom would reign. The events of April 19, 1775, in Lexington and Concord did not merely mark the beginning of a war. They ignited a revolution that would reshape the course of history. The shot heard round the world, as it would later be immortalized, became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. This singular moment, where 8 colonists lost their lives, transformed into a rallying cry for liberty and galvanized the 13 colonies into action against British oppression. John Adams later reflected on the significance of this day, stating, "It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty," recognizing its monumental impact on the colony's quest for independence. As the years unfolded, the revolution birthed a new nation, the United States of America, founded on principles of liberty, equality, and self-governance. The Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson in 1776, articulated these ideals, proclaiming that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This document laid the philosophical groundwork for democracy, influencing not only the United States, but also countless movements for freedom worldwide. However, the legacy of the American Revolution was not without its contradictions. While it championed the rights of the individual, it simultaneously upheld the institution of slavery, a glaring hypocrisy that would lead to deep-rooted divisions within the nation. The revolutionaries who fought for their freedom often denied it to others. In 1776, about 500,000 enslaved individuals lived in the American colonies, and the revolution did little to alter their status. Figures like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who articulated aspirations for liberty, were themselves slaveholders. This moral paradox would haunt the nation, sowing seeds of conflict that culminated in the Civil War nearly a century later. The revolution also inspired a wave of democratic ideals that swept across the globe. In France, the echoes of the American struggle resonated during the French Revolution of 1789. The cry for liberté, égalité, fraternité reflected the influence of American revolutionary thought. However, the French Revolution diverged sharply from its American counterpart, descending into chaos and terror, showing that the quest for liberty could be fraught with peril. The revolutionary fervor sparked by the American colonies provided both a blueprint for freedom and a cautionary tale of how quickly ideals could spiral into violence and tyranny. Meanwhile, the legacy of the American Revolution was mythologized in the years following the war. The Founding Fathers became larger-than-life figures in the American imagination, their stories embellished through retellings and commemorations. Events such as the Boston Tea Party and the signing of the Declaration of Independence were elevated to heroic status, transforming ordinary figures into legendary patriots. This mythologizing served a dual purpose. It fostered national pride and unity while also simplifying the complex realities of the revolution. The sacrifices made by lesser-known individuals were often overshadowed by the narratives surrounding iconic leaders like Samuel Adams, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin. The revolution's legacy was also enshrined in various national rituals and monuments. The 4th of July became a day of celebration, a time for Americans to reflect on their hard-won freedoms. Parades, fireworks, and speeches became synonymous with the day, embedding the revolutionary spirit into the fabric of American culture. However, this celebration often glossed over the ongoing struggles faced by marginalized groups, including Native Americans, women, and enslaved people. The narrative of freedom was frequently one-dimensional, focused solely on the achievements of white men, while neglecting the contributions and sacrifices of others. As the United States expanded westward, the ideals born from the revolution were put to the test. The concept of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent, was both a continuation of revolutionary ideals and a harbinger of oppression. Native American nations faced dispossession and violence as settlers pushed westward, often justified by the same rhetoric of freedom and liberty that had fueled the revolution. The displacement and suffering of indigenous peoples were stark reminders that the fight for freedom was not universally applied. In the 19th century, the revolutionary legacy continued to shape American identity. The abolitionist movement harnessed the rhetoric of the revolution to argue against slavery, appealing to the founding ideals of liberty and equality. Figures such as Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe used the language of the revolution to galvanize support for abolition, arguing that the promise of freedom was hollow if it did not extend to all. The Civil War would ultimately test the nation's commitment to these principles, leading to the abolition of slavery and further redefining the notion of freedom in America. However, the revolution's legacy was not only about triumphs, it also included failures and unfulfilled promises. The initial fervor for equality did not extend to women who remained largely disenfranchised. The Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 marked the beginning of the women's suffrage movement, where activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Sott drew upon the revolutionary spirit to demand equal rights. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal," they declared, calling attention to the inherent contradictions in a nation that professed liberty yet denied it to half its population. The 20th century saw further reinterpretations of the revolutionary legacy. The civil rights movement of the 1960s drew heavily from the language of the revolution, invoking the ideals of equality and justice in the struggle against segregation and discrimination. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech referenced the Declaration of Independence, a testament to how the revolutionary ideals continued to resonate through the ages, inspiring new generations to fight for justice. The American Revolution also became a symbol for movements worldwide. From Latin America to Asia, the narrative of a people rising against colonial powers found inspiration in the American experience. The principles of self-determination and democratic governance echoed through the halls of history, challenging oppressive regimes and igniting aspirations for freedom. Yet the revolution's legacy remains a complex tapestry, woven with both triumphs and tragedies. It serves as a reminder that the ideals of liberty and equality are continually tested and redefined. The United States' journey since that fateful day in April 1775 underscores the importance of vigilance in upholding these principles, recognizing that the fight for true freedom is ongoing. As we reflect on this legacy, we are reminded of the words of Thomas Paine, who wrote, "These are the times that try men's souls." The revolution was not just a moment in time, but a catalyst for change that continues to shape our lives today. The ambitions and struggles of those early revolutionaries resonate still, challenging each generation to live up to the ideals they fought for, to ensure that the promise of liberty is extended to all. In the quiet of our own reflections, we may find ourselves pondering the significance of that day in April, the sacrifices made, and the ideals forged in the fire of revolution. It is a legacy that invites us to remember not just the victories, but also the ongoing struggles for freedom and justice, echoing through time as a call to action for the future. Through the unfolding events of the American Revolution, we have witnessed the complex interplay of ambition, power, and resilience. The fervor ignited by acts of defiance, such as the Boston Tea Party and the shot heard round the world at Lexington, reveals much about human nature. The individuals involved, driven by a profound desire for autonomy and justice, were not merely participating in a political struggle. They were expressing deep-seated hopes and fears for their future and the future of their nation. Samuel Adams, often regarded as the architect of rebellion, displayed a relentless ambition that underscores the lengths to which individuals will go in pursuit of their ideals. His words and actions galvanized those around him, embodying a spirit of defiance and unity among the colonists. Adams proclaimed, "If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace." This sentiment resonates throughout history, reminding us that the fight for liberty often demands great sacrifice and unwavering commitment. Yet amidst the fervor of revolution, we also see the darker facets of human ambition. The struggle for power can lead to disarray and even betrayal. Figures like King George III, who epitomized the distant authority the colonists sought to escape, and Thomas Cromwell, who navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics, illustrate how ambition can spiral into tyranny when unchecked. Their stories remind us that the quest for power can corrupt, turning benevolent intentions into mechanisms of oppression. The pursuit of love and loyalty can also intertwine with ambition, as exemplified by the relationships forged during these turbulent times. The bonds between leaders and their followers, such as that of John Hancock and Samuel Adams, reveal the deep connections that can inspire collective action. These relationships are often steeped in personal sacrifice, highlighting the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. The desire to protect one's family and community from tyranny ignites a flame of courage that can transcend fear. Failure, too, is an integral part of this narrative. The toll of war is steep, with countless lives lost on both sides. The Battle of Bunker Hill, for instance, resulted in significant casualties, yet it served as a rallying point for the colonists. It was a moment that crystallized their resolve, turning despair into determination. As De Joseph Warren fell, he became a symbol of sacrifice, embodying the idea that from loss can come inspiration. This duality of failure and resilience is a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Survival is woven throughout the fabric of this revolution. The colonists, faced with overwhelming odds, endured not just for their own freedom, but for the generations that would follow. The hardships they faced, the scarcity of resources, the threat of violence, the uncertainty of the future, forge a narrative of survival that resonates with anyone who has faced adversity. Their ability to unite in the face of such challenges speaks to the innate human capacity for collaboration and solidarity. As we reflect on these themes, ambition, love, power, failure, and survival, we are reminded that the story of the American Revolution is not just a tale of historical events. It is a reflection of the human experience. The characters within it, with their ambitions and desires, reflect each of us in our own struggles and aspirations. Their legacy is a reminder that history is not merely a series of dates and battles. It is the story of real people, driven by their passions and convictions, navigating the complexities of life. Carrying this narrative with us as we drift into sleep, we can find solace in the knowledge that the fight for freedom and justice is a timeless endeavor. The echoes of their struggles remind us that we, too, have the capacity to shape our destinies, to stand firm in our beliefs, and to pursue our dreams with unwavering resolve. As the night envelops us, let us embrace the legacy of those who came before, remembering their courage as we forge our own paths ahead. Thank you for spending this time with us. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the past, consider subscribing to Sleeping History Dreams for more long-form historical storytelling each week. Good night, and we'll see you in the next one.